Ms. Burkett, you're recognized at this time.
Good morning, Mayor. Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you. We are pleased to be here this morning to present to the board the Domestic Violence Commission's work that they have completed since 2019 through the pandemic. They persevered and have a wonderful set of recommendations that they are going to present to you today. We appreciate the board's time yesterday for briefings, a lot of great feedback, and instead of hearing from me, you have the pleasure this morning of hearing from the two very qualified co-chairs, as the mayor said, that have been working on this and working with the commission since 2005. So it's my honor and pleasure to introduce Mr. Dick Batchelor, who will kick off this presentation, and he will be followed by the Honorable Alice Blackwell, Circuit Judge for the Ninth Judicial Circuit. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Batchelor.
And just a few additional comments. I've known Mr. Batchelor for a long time. Dick Batchelor is president of Dick Batchelor Management Group here in Orange County, and he has been actively engaged in the Domestic Violence Commission since the inception. He is a longtime advocate in this area and was one of the authors of the domestic violence legislation in 1978 when he served in the Florida legislature. And Judge Blackwell is a circuit court judge here within the Ninth Judicial Circuit, and she has a dubious distinction of having served for 30 years as a judge, and 15 of those years have been in the Domestic Violence Division. She continues to serve as the administrative judge for the Domestic Violence Division. And Mr. Batchelor, you are recognized.
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, thank you very much for your time this morning, and thank you for reappointing and re-engaging the Domestic Violence Commission. I want to publicly thank all the commission members, and also we had committee members who were non-commission members who participated in this process. I think we had about 42 meetings. We spent about 100 hours looking at what would be appropriate recommendations to make to the commission going forward. I particularly want to, I guess the kids said I'll give a shout out to, if I can do that to a judge. I guess I could do that to a judge. I'm not before the bench today. Judge Blackwell has been with me as a partner in this since Lydia Gardner and Belvin Perry came up with the idea, and you served with us as a sheriff, so it brings us back to our recommendations. But one of the reasons we continue, and the mayor continues to have us focus on the domestic violence issue, because 1 out of 3 women will be somehow subjected to some violence, and 1 out of 4 men. And in the country, there's 20 cases of about every hour in this country of people who are being abused by an intimate partner. So obviously it's very important. If you look at the arrest record in 2021 up to date, it's less because we think that's attributed to the pandemic, where people might be living in situations where it's not healthy, to be euphemistic about it, but did not necessarily report it. But if you go back to 2020, several thousand cases in Orange County, and the really startling number to recall is that about 17% increase in homicides related to domestic violence. So we've certainly defined this issue, and again, Mr. Mayor, thank you for reappointing this commission to come up with some recommendations for you today. Before I turn the floor over to Judge Alice Blackwell to get into more details, I wanted to also point out to the mayor and the commissioners that this is not done in a vacuum. For instance, I said on the Behavioral Mental Health Commission that the mayor has recently appointed, which I will say again, Mr. Mayor, is the most inclusive process with the most inclusive number of people I've ever participated in, I believe. Because domestic violence, obviously, there is a mental health issue, whether it's the abuser or the survivor. And I use that word again and again, survivor, because they are survivors, number one. And number two, we look at all of this from the survivor-centric point of view. And to the mayor's credit, he appointed 3 survivors to this commission. So we enjoyed a perspective that we had not enjoyed before. So we're very survivor-centric in how we look at these things. So that's very important. And also, Mr. Mayor, you also be pleased to note that you had affordable housing task force. Affordable housing was one of the issues that we're addressing with domestic violence. You had the Behavioral Mental Health Forum. We're looking at mental health and the services to women and perpetrators and children too, because children are the collateral damage in domestic violence cases. You know, we all hear about ACE, adverse childhood experience, and that's where we kind of focus on it, because if we don't address the adverse childhood experience that child has, then we're not going to resolve the issues that come with that. So I want to say that, Mr. Mayor, because it comes back also under the Orange County Children's Commission. So we were trying to be very specific, but also holistic in how we look at these issues and how we partner, because the resources in many cases are already there. Let me, as the last thing, I had 3 commissioners that I briefed yesterday. Commissioner Wilson had a question regarding mental health. I hope I've answered that. I already have a call to the Donna White, who's very responsive, and I'll get you more specifics as to how much money we're using under the Orange County Children's Commission for treatment in this specific area. So we'll know that it's coordinated. Commissioner Gomez-Cordero, with her professional background, she asked the most amount of questions. She got moved to the head of the class. And one of the things you asked me about, Commissioner, was the housing issue. I sit on the Orlando Housing Authority and HSN, and I wanted to confirm again with you this morning that we have about 100 vouchers through the Housing Authority that are supplemental to the federal program. If you look at wraparound housing, about 50% of those cases are domestic violence cases. So we are addressing that in the housing component. And last, Commissioner Reby had a question regarding immigration attorneys in Harbor House. I spoke to Michelle Sperzel this morning. She's very receptive, and she was going to be contacting you regarding an upcoming conference that would involve immigration attorneys and as they deal with domestic violence cases. So now, may I turn it over to Judge Alice Blackwell.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners, and we're so grateful for the time that you spent with us yesterday and that you're allowing us today as well. On our commission, we had such a great number of community members, and I also wanted to let you know that some of them are here today. And if you are a member of the commission, I wish you'd just stand and be recognized today so that the Commission knows that you're here today. I know that we have Judge Lattimore here today. I know that we have other members of our commission, Michelle Sperzel from the Harbor House, and I'm sorry I can't see you around the mask. Oh, thank you so much. Yes, it's so good to see you as well. So we have commission members, and I know we have other commission members who are watching on video. Thank you so much for being here. And our commission members, you see the list here, and it goes on to the next page as well. Why is this not moving forward? There we go. And I want you to know that we were very careful, and the mayor was very careful in appointing the commission and at our committee level to include African American, Hispanic, Asian, Haitian, and LGBTQ plus community members. And beyond that, when we reached out into our committee work, we reached even further out into the community to be sure that we were very inclusive of our community partners. We really wanted to make an effort to be sure that we were doing what needed to be done to be representative of the community. And in the 42 meetings and 100 hours to develop the recommendations that we're going to show you today, we were extremely, extremely inclusive. So we had 4 work groups to do the major work of the commission. And those work groups broke down into 4 parts, as you've heard: court process, system process, community services, and resources, and public awareness and community education. And we reached out to over 30 agencies and minority and multicultural providers to come up with these recommendations. Now, I'm going to go down a side road for a minute before I get to the recommendations for you. And here's the side road. We've used this process now for a lot of years. And we've done some really major things in Orange County as a result. I know that there's sometimes some feeling of, oh great, here comes the domestic violence task force or work group again, and here's just a bunch of more recommendations. But I want you to know we've done some great things. One of them is near and dear to my heart, and that's we have a dedicated domestic violence court in Orange County, and that's unique across the state. There are only a few courts in the state of Florida that are doing that, and it is huge. And Michelle Sprezel will tell you, and Judge Lattimore, who served in that court, will tell you it's very unique. And that's solely the work of the Domestic Violence Commission early on that happened. And it makes a huge impact for people in this community. So even little things like that have come out of this, and there's spin-offs from that. And we've advanced legislation. We've really done some great things. So these recommendations we're going to talk to you about are significant. They may seem small, but they're significant. So we'll look first at the Court Process Committee for you, and it was chaired by Judge Lattimore, who's here today, who is a powerhouse. And you see the members of the committee there who are all powerhouses in their own right. And we all had to laugh when she made her recommendations because it was phenomenal. And their first recommendation was based on what they heard from survivors who provided their experiences, as well as service providers. And the consistent theme that they heard from them in this recommendation was that it's really difficult to maneuver through the court system while you're trying to remain informed and receive services. So their first recommendation came from that. And what the committee is recommending is a centralized location in the community for services, a single location where they can get support and referrals for victims of domestic violence. And the services they're looking for is legal assistance, case management, peer assistance, counseling, temporary housing, and financial assistance, as well as filing paperwork and court documents. Harbor House can provide some of that, but there are many agencies and many things that go on that need to come together with Harbor House to do that. So as you can see, we have several action items for this recommendation, which include offering trauma-focused services for child survivors and offering a mobile unit that could assist victims with services when those victims lack transportation. And then there's some continued action items for this recommendation that you can see there. There's the trauma-focused based services for child survivors, and they've made up a list of the kinds of things that we would look to have in that type of single point of service location for survivors. In their second recommendation, what this work group identified is that the current system that we have for processing paperwork, civil injunction paperwork, is sort of an old-timey system where we print injunction paperwork and it's hand carried by a courier to the sheriff's office and then it's taken hand carried for service, and it goes all on a paper basis. There's some basis for that, but that's what happens. And so we want to look at, is it possible to do electronic transmission of some part or all of that in order to speed it up? Because anything that gets that to happen faster is safer. So that's what this particular recommendation is directed to. The third recommendation is about the fact that we don't have a really good ability, even in this day and age, for courts, law enforcement, and other agencies to communicate across systems to get information about where people are. And in the domestic violence world, that creates a problem with the perpetrators, because they're often being kicked out of their homes when they're arrested, excuse me, or when an injunction is entered. And so they're moving about, and we need to find them, and the sheriff's trying to serve them or trying to arrest them. And so this recommendation is based on how can we fix that issue. So when they're moving about, somebody may know where they are. They may be arrested in one county and the other county is looking for them for an injunction and doesn't know. So these recommendations are based on trying to figure out a fix for that. The fourth recommendation, I told you Judge Lattimore and her group were overachievers, and they were good. So their fourth recommendation, thank you so much, is to establish an e-portal with the clerk's office, the clerk of court, to receive returns of service. Here's what happens to us in the courtroom as judges. If we send a document out for service in another county, the sheriff in that county serves it, but we don't get the return of service back quickly. So we'll set a hearing, and everybody shows up for the hearing. We can't go forward unless we can prove the person was served. So unless we get that paperwork back quickly, we have to reset it. And every time you reset a hearing, criminal or civil, it's another opportunity for the survivor not to come back. It's another opportunity for the perpetrator to prove to the survivor, hey, look, the system's not going to work for you. I'm in control. And so we need to speed that system up. And so this is the fix that Judge Lattimore's work group is suggesting that we work on in order to try to close that gap so that perpetrators and survivors don't come back multiple times. It helps for safety. And in their fifth recommendation, that same problem, the communication problem that happens in the court system from time to time among the various parts talking to each other, is when a person who's in batterer's intervention for treatment as a perpetrator, when he or she has violated a condition of release on bond or has violated the conditions of their civil injunction, we need to get that information to the BIP provider so that the BIP provider doesn't say that they've successfully completed batterer's intervention. And so we need to make that link, and this is the recommendation for that. That's a dangerous gap because if we say they've successfully completed batterer's intervention when they've in fact violated, we've got a problem there, and that's to close that particular gap. So that's the recommendation of the court process work group, and all focused on the court system. The next work group is system process, which was chaired by Michelle Sprazel. And system process, and you can see the members there, all great people again, and experts in their area. And again, they reached out into the community to bring people in with them. And in this work group, they were looking at the bigger system, not just court system, but the bigger system sort of countywide. And this is really an interesting situation here. They immediately focused on the issue of we need to be able to map what happens because we've got lots of agencies and lots of service providers doing work. And how can we look at this and see what's going to happen? And pretty quickly they focused on the idea that what we probably need to do is do a system mapping process. And you heard about this in the briefing yesterday. And fortunately, Michelle, Ms. Brazel, very cleverly, in my view, was able to identify, after a good deal of time and effort, funds and ask for the Department of Children and Families to get permission to use funds that she already had available, earmarked for one purpose, to be allowed to be used for a system mapping process to be done by an expert in system mapping processes. And so we now have funds to do a professionally guided system mapping process that would be done by the members of this work group so that we can look at what's available in Orange County, where are there overlaps where people are doing the same thing and they maybe could not do the same thing and use those resources to fill the gaps that are identified in the system mapping process. And I got to tell you, back in 2004 and 2005 when Mr. Batchelor and I were first doing this, we were trying to do this ourselves, and we became so overwhelmed that we couldn't do it. When we tried, it was just too much. So having the expert is going to be the key here. So the first recommendation is exactly that, to do a community mapping project. And then the second recommendation is, once we get that and have that identified and can see our gaps and see our overlaps, for us to get back together and figure out what do we do with that now to either improve the recommendations that we've made or to supplement them. And that we're very excited about. And it seems simple, but it's huge, and we're thrilled. It's huge. Our third work group was the Community Services and Resources Committee, chaired by Jerry Glenn, who's the Chief Legal Officer for Embrace Families. And you see his members. And again, they reached out into the community and brought others in, and a great work group with incredible expertise about community services and resources. And in their recommendation, their first recommendation dealt with monitoring and reporting on the work of the Domestic Violence Commission on an ongoing basis, and also, very importantly, to review the training curriculum on domestic violence for county personnel and within the community. And in their recommendations, they wanted us to particularly look at training programs that can be used by faith-based and humanistic leaders. What we know, those of us that work a lot with domestic violence, with families that are impacted by domestic violence, that when they begin to have problems with domestic violence, one of the first places people go is to their faith-based leaders. Their ministers, their rabbis, their imams, wherever they do their faith-based, where they lead their faith-based lives, that's where they go. And if those people don't have resources available to them, if they don't have help with knowing what to do and say, they often don't know how to help. And so we're learning very quickly that we need to build trust with the faith-based leaders, and we also need to give them tools to help them know how to help. And so that's really important. Fire, rescue, and law enforcement, school resource officers, courts and others, everybody needs that type of training. And so that is one of the areas that they really think that focus needs to be placed. Lots of the fire, rescue, law enforcement, courts receive training, but you can't ever let off the gas on that. You have to keep your foot on the pedal in order to get that to happen. And again, the second recommendation is to engage with the faith-based community, but also with the focus on prevention. And this second recommendation deals with the prevention idea, that you don't want to just engage with, okay, once the problem has happened, what do you do? But also, how do you help the faith-based community and humanistic community to assist in prevention? How do you talk about why domestic violence is a bad thing and why you should help people deal with that in advance? And they also talked about the multiple languages, that it needs to be done in a way that is accessible to people in their primary language. You can't do it. You can't do everything in English and expect that in a Haitian community that's going to be usable. It's not. And so you've got to do everything that you do in multiple languages so that it can be received by people in the language that is comfortable to them. And they recommended engaging in media partners from all platforms and Orange TV to engage in campaign messages as well. Their recommendation number 3 had to do with response teams and Orange County law enforcement agencies. And again, this is the idea of, it's not new, but we do need to make sure we have continued efforts and emphases on this area. Their recommendation number 4 is to make the connection with the Orange County Citizens Commission for Children. And Dick Batchelor is really one of our links because he's the commonality there between us. But with the additional $20 million allocated for children's services by the Board of County Commission, we're asking for the Orange County Citizens Commission for Children to consider adding domestic violence as a funding category. What we know from studying children who are in homes where there is domestic violence is that even if they never see or hear the domestic violence, the imbalance of power in the home creates an adverse experience for the child. If the child sees or hears the domestic violence, it is in fact an adverse childhood experience for the child and is trauma for the child. So we're hoping that we can help make that link there and help and ask for that to be included. And it's really important that we invest in prevention and intervention services in this area. Their 5th recommendation has to do with transportation, an area that's near and dear to the mayor's heart. But one of the biggest barriers for survivors, and honestly also for perpetrators of domestic violence, is transportation to do the things that they need to do. For instance, for perpetrators, it's to attend batterer's intervention when that is done in person, and for survivors to get to the services that they need. And so we are proposing to work with private transportation companies, Links, and others to secure funding or in-kind donations to address this barrier. And the committee is proposing a resource directory of transportation services for parties and for service providers so that we can really help people do that. Parking is a major barrier to come to the courthouse, for instance, those kinds of things. So that's what we're talking about doing here to help people be able to get where they need to get. Their recommendation number 6 was to prioritize housing resources for victims of domestic violence. And I know Michelle Brazel could talk our ears off for a couple of hours on this topic, because housing people, when someone holds up their hand and says, I no longer want to be married or live with my abuser, finding a way to house himself or herself and whatever children or other persons they have with them becomes huge, because almost always economic abuse accompanies physical abuse. And so the ability for that person then to be able to live somewhere affordable becomes critical. And so we know that affordable housing is a priority, and we appreciate the Mayor's Housing for All task force that's addressing this critical issue, and we hope that domestic violence will be folded into that issue. And Mr. Batchelor told me that the Homeless Services Network is receiving funding from the Orlando Housing Authority to specifically address housing needs for victims of domestic violence, and that's the type of partnership that we're hoping to grow in this area. So that's great. And then last but certainly not least is the Public Awareness and Community Education Committee that was chaired by Heather Wilkie, who's the Executive Director of the Zebra Coalition, an amazing person. And she was joined by several dedicated members of the commission and community partners, and they developed 3 recommendations. The first, which is already in existence, was to create public service announcements, and Orange TV produced the first PSA, which is fabulous and diverse, and we look forward to producing more. We got to see it. It was wonderful. And in addition, we are hoping to develop a strategy for billboard placements with messages in multiple languages and put that on public transit at some point as well. The second recommendation has to do with a multilingual domestic violence resource page and e-guide. Again, we want to expand that eventually so that we have all kinds of resources on that page in multiple languages. And finally, their recommendation number 3 is to publish stories on Orange County Newsroom that are educational so that people have access to those. And importantly, we want to talk about what are signs of domestic violence and how to access services earlier rather than later. So that's the work. What are the next steps? We are asking that the county convene a staff work group to develop a strategic implementation timeline, and that the staff provide biannual progress reports to you. And our action for you today is we're requesting that you accept the Orange County Domestic Violence Commission recommendations to reduce incidents of domestic violence and better serve victims and survivors and perpetrators, I would say, in Orange County, because we need to address the needs of perpetrators as well. I do want to thank the mayor for his leadership and his wisdom in setting this up and in choosing the members of the commission. They were incredible and hardworking. I want to thank Carol Burkett and Elia Torres, mayor, and members of the commission. They were unbelievable, and they did incredible work and supported the commission under truly what were combat conditions during COVID. We wanted to keep working, and they figured it out, and we did it. and they were wonderful. And I thank each of you for your time and your interest in this matter. And Mr. Batchelor and I are available for any questions, if anybody has questions or comments, Mayor.
All right, Judge Blackwell, you thanked us, but let me thank you.
Yes, sir.
I thank you and Mr. Batchelor, as well as all of those who served on the commission. This certainly is an important issue to our community, and it certainly is one of the many priorities that I have. We look forward to now implementing and executing the plan, and hopefully in a few moments the board will accept the recommendations. But the goal from here is to have that staff work group work through the county administrator to work with our community partners and stakeholders to make those determinations where there may be funding gaps. In some cases, there are certain community organizations that are more appropriate to implement certain delivery of services, and understanding all of that. As I see it, this is a public-private philanthropic process. There are some things that certain organizations do very well here in the community, and they're already established to do that, and we want to make certain that we tap into the existing resources. But where we may need to establish another office for coordination, et cetera, we will work through where should that specific office be housed, under what entity, whether it's Orange County government or one of our other community stakeholders. I think we'll work through all of that. It would be my desire to ensure that we maintain some accountability, and probably no less than on an annual basis we will have the members, we will ask the members of the commission to come back together to allow us to present a report card on just how we're doing, in addition to those updates that will be required to the Board of County Commission. The board certainly has to maintain some oversight of the process as decisions will be made. But as we understand the recommendations, some of it will require some budgetary commitments from the county, and again, that is where county administration will work through the Board of County Commission to make sure that where appropriate we provide funding, and where appropriate, if there are other funding partners in the community, we want to engage with them as well to ensure that we're doing the best things for all of those domestic violence victims. And the ultimate goal is to reduce the prevalence of domestic violence within our community and be proactive. So as I see it, this is an overall effort to be proactive to the emerging changes that we see within our community. So I cannot thank you and the entire commission enough for the work that you have done at this point. I'm going to open it up, Judge, to our commissioners. We have several who have indicated a desire to speak, and we'll begin with Commissioner Maribel Gomez Cordero.
Thank you, Mayor. It was the first time this time. See. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you to all the staff and the board members, and all the partners here. I just wanted, I know we talked a lot yesterday and we discussed a lot of good things. Thank you. I just forgot to mention that one of the basic things, and I know you can put it there in the wraparound services, in the mapping, and so for the victim, is to educate them or try to lean them to be independently financially. Why? Because sometimes, or the majority of the times, this victim doesn't leave the home or doesn't leave the abuser because they don't know how financially they're going to support themselves and the kids. So I think that's so basic. I think we should hit that, and nail it right there, so that way we can empower them and they could, get rid of the victim.
Commissioner, you're exactly right. And one of the things statewide that we teach. I teach on the faculty for domestic violence for judges, and one of the things we teach is that when you give them an injunction, you need to give them child support if they have children and alimony if they're married. Because without the economic support, they can't leave. And that's so critical. And I know that at Harbor House, they're really focused on trying to find support in terms of affordable housing and jobs and ways, because the number one reason why people return to abusive relationships is because they can't make it financially.
Yes.
And because that economic abuse is in almost every single time coupled with the physical and emotional abuse.
And
So
actually,
you're
that's what
100% right.
And that's why what they use also against the victim, the power of, money and you cannot do it by yourself and you cannot do this. And that's when, we all come in and try to train them, because even though if child support or whatever, sometimes they struggle with that because, I don't know, the abuser or whoever doesn't want to follow, or they cannot find him, or he's somewhere, and then they still struggle. So if we empower them, they will, we
Yes, you're 100%
can decrease
right.
these numbers.
100%.
And another thing that I think we should also do is be more stronger with the laws and the legislation up there, so we can, protect more the victim. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, we're going to go to Commissioner Wilson.
So thank you so much. I just want to say, seeing that the briefing was coming with Judge Blackwell and Dick Batchelor, and I just had one of those moments where I felt really proud to be an Orange County resident, knowing that two of my favorite people on the planet collaborate for this type of commission and making lives of people out there who don't even know about your great works every day, making them better. And I just want to also give a shout out to the judge. Judge Blackwell was the first woman administrative law judge in Orange County and taught this commissioner everything she knows about family law. So I often go back to the many conversations that we had about the things that come in front of the court and how fortunate we are to have a domestic violence court. Reading through the commission report, and I was so encouraged to see the diversity of commission members and stakeholders, and I think I'm probably preaching to the choir here and talking about the sort of the hidden or blind spot that we've had in the past for the transgender community and domestic violence, because there's real fear of reprisal in that community for reaching out even to their medical provider or to law enforcement. And so seeing that there was contributions from a wide array of stakeholders really also, to me, it showed we're in a new day. My only sort of question, and this is more of a thought process thing moving forward, was about the dependence that we sort of have in all aspects of this, of good internet connection. And we know now after the COVID period that utilities should include good internet connection, and that the isolation of people in domestic violence are, it is magnified sometimes by that inability to log on somewhere, and how that may be incorporated into some of these, especially the communication portion of the recommendations. And thank you so much again.
Right, and we'll be sensitive to that. And Harbor House even has a link on their website where if someone's getting help, when they log out, it like erases the link so that the abuser can't follow behind and see that they were even on their website. So that community really thinks through that whole issue because of the danger of using the internet and being tracked by the abuser. So it's really tricky in that regard. But yes, I agree that you have to make that available, reliable internet available and services available in that regard. Is that what you're talking about particularly?
All the above.
Yeah, okay.
Exactly. Just it's sort of a, when you think about the development of, recommendations that look so different now than they would have 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And, part of that component is the victimization component of internet, and then also the outreach component of the internet.
Well, on the LB, on the LBTGQ plus community, I don't have the number, I don't have the thing right if I don't have it in front of me. But at any rate, when we said faith-based and humanistic, the humanistic is specifically that community.
Yeah.
Because we can't just train the faith-based community, we also have to reach out to the non-faith-based community that speaks to that constituency. Because they go to different places that may not be faith-based, and we want to also put that information there. And I don't think I made that clear, and so in response to your comment, I want to be sure that you know that that was a major part of our recommendation, that in preparing the faith-based materials, we also want to reach out into the service sector that serves that community and provide that same information there, because we see a very high incidence of domestic violence in both the same-sex and the trans community, very high. And they don't come to the courts in the same level that we see in other opposite sex or even some of the same-sex communities. And so that's an area where we need to do some work. So thank you.
Thank you so much.